the Lord Speaker.
Good afternoon, everyone, and a very warm welcome to all of you. This is a really, truly great occasion. I think it's only the 6th time in the history of this chamber that people who are not members of the House have been asked to come in here and to debate. So it is a big first for us. It's also a big first that we're going to have an intergenerational debate. That is, members of the University of the Third Age and students will debate together. And I really, really look forward to hearing what your views are and indeed what conclusions you will come to. What we're here to do today is to debate what is, I am sure you all acknowledge, a very, very pressing issue which has social, economic and ethical aspects to it. Namely, how do we care for a vulnerable population which includes the disabled, children in care and an ageing population. And speaking about the latter, an ageing population, as I think again all of you will know, that it is becoming quite a pressing issue because the sort of demographic balance of the country is changing. And in fact, so serious is it that the House of Lords has set up a select committee in order to look very carefully at the economic impact of the demographic change in our population, particularly what it's going to cost us in terms of public services. So this is an extremely timely debate, and one again which I look forward to enormously. Some very practical issues, which I'm sure you've all been terribly well briefed, but perhaps I can brief you once again. The Clerk of the Parliament, who sits opposite me here, Mr. David Beamish, will be timing the speeches today, and no doubt you've already decided on what the timing mechanism is. There's going to be a gong or a clap of hands. There's going to be something. There's been a gavel. Okay. We open then with 6 main speeches from the 3 different views on who should be caring for the vulnerable. That is the state, the family, or the third sector. And then we will have a floor debate. And I'll be calling on some people by name who can raise and others who can raise their hands if they want to speak, and I will call you. So if you do want to speak, when we get to the debating part, as it were, after the main speeches, do please put up your hand, and I will try and choose people from all the various groupings here in the chamber today. We'll then have the closing or summary speeches, followed by your chance to vote on who you think should be responsible for supporting the vulnerable in our society. Okay, so we've got our marching orders. We'll now start with the big care debate, a historic event. Main speakers will each have 4 minutes, up to 4 minutes, to make the case for the state, the family and the third sector. And let me start off by calling on Ben Rabhog from Westminster City School for the state.
My Lord Speaker, fellow students and members of the U3A. In my first point, I will outline what is perhaps the most obvious point that will be made here today, and that is the fact that the state is financially the most capable of the 3 actors for caring for the vulnerable. This is due to the fact that the state has a constant and sizable annual income from taxes, and the care that the state provides is universal and it is available for everyone. Prime examples of this would be the NHS and the British education system. Free healthcare and education for every citizen, regardless of income or social background. In 2010, the state spent over 33 billion on education and over 118 billion on public healthcare. These are both extremely necessary figures, and figures that the third sector and the family would never be able to match. So clearly, free healthcare and education is something that the third sector and the family could never provide and could never be trusted to provide, for they are simply too important to be left to anyone else. If we were to leave this to the other sectors, they would be extremely vulnerable to situations like legal cases, If a particularly damaging legal case were to cripple a particular organisation providing care, then thousands of people subscribed to them for their support would be left without the care that they so desperately need. And would a third sector care organisation be able to accommodate everyone's needs? What about special needs students? According to the latest government figures, nearly 243,000 students in Britain require learning support within their schools. Would anyone other than the state be capable of providing that? While it is true that there are many important and influential charities across the country, they are often regional and focus on only a small area of expertise, which my colleague Kelsey will outline in her speech. They are not necessarily capable of supporting our diverse and ever-growing population. There are unfortunately certain cases in which the family would not be able to provide all of the support needed. While they know best what a loved one needs emotionally, this does not necessarily mean that they can help medically. And for people that cannot afford the private care that the third sector provides, this is where the state steps in and supports in any way that is necessary. All of this shows that due to the fact that the state has a much larger and more constant amount of money, the care and support that they provide is of a higher quality and higher stability for the greatest amount of people. My second point focuses on the fact that not only does the state support the majority of the vulnerable, it also supports the other two actors here today. For example, the family often needs support in the form of family allowance, in child support and child benefits. In many cases, it would be difficult, if not impossible, for families to continue functioning without this help. The state also supports third sector companies like charities by providing them with tax breaks and financial support so that they can continue to help and to improve the quality of their help. Now, I don't know of a single completely harmonious and functional family, certainly not mine, but what if the whole family breaks down? In the unfortunate case that this does happen, it is up to the state to step in and provide temporary care for the children and find them a new home to keep them out of poverty and keep them on the right track. Therefore, the state doesn't just support the vulnerable, it also supports the other two actors here today, allowing them to continue providing support for the vulnerable and prevent them from becoming vulnerable themselves, thus providing even more care for others. It's for these reasons that I am proud to represent the state. Thank you very much.
Jocelyn Canavet, please.
Lord Speaker, fellow students and members of the University of the Third Age. The history of care provision in the UK has been long, varied and complex, with the Ordinance of Labour's Act of 1349 often considered to be the first example of social care legislation. However, I'd like to propose that although the state has a legal responsibility to provide care for its citizens, this care can be seen as impersonal and inefficient. Real care for centuries has been delivered by a much more devoted sector of our society, the family. The family comes first. The family may no longer just be the traditional nuclear family, but is what people choose to make it to be. It is the quintessential unit of society. Indeed, to quote Margaret Thatcher, there is no such thing as society. There are individual men and women, and there are families. Lord Speaker, families provide a level of care which is loving, dedicated and sensitive. The care is flexible and works in many ways. Firstly, let us examine the role played by grandparents. Every year, thousands of grandparents step in to care for vulnerable children who can no longer live with their parents. These kinship carers give children a secure future and save the country billions of pounds by keeping them out of care. It would cost councils £40,000 every child if only 10% of these children were in foster care. But these carers face massive difficulties, including poverty, discrimination and isolation, especially if they're over 65. And yet, these kinship carers succeed in giving families a secure and loving upbringing. Families are at risk of being torn apart if these carers aren't given the support they need. Furthermore, there are massive inequalities here. The support group Grandparents Plus is calling for the introduction of paid leave for kinship carers, similar to maternity leave. They want the government to keep its promise to extend the right of flexible working hours. Lord Speaker, these are the forgotten families of family policy. Secondly, let us examine the role of personalised family care. I believe, Lord Speaker, that the family can offer a more friendly and secure, confident care programme, and crucially, it is delivered by devoted family members who really do care. There is a plethora of anecdotal evidence and factual research which shows that elderly people prefer to remain in their own homes where they can maintain a high level of independence. Sadly, there's an equal amount of evidence that suggests that proper care in large impersonal care homes often leaves a lot to be desired. 2 weeks ago, the BBC's reported appalling examples of healthcare, where patients were said to have been neglected, left in pain and without food and water. The Patients Association said this should act as a wake-up call. In one case, a dementia patient was admitted to hospital with meningitis. He was placed in a dementia-friendly ward, but managed to escape and was found drowned in a nearby stream. Lord Speaker, the family comes first. To conclude, Lord Speaker, I return to Miss Thatcher, who went to say, "And no government can do anything except through the people. It is our duty to look after ourselves and then also to look after our neighbours." Lord Speaker, the family comes first.
Dan Collett for the Third Sector.
My Lord Speaker, fellow students and members of the U3A, Banbury Academy is today proposing the premise that the third sector should be the ones to provide the main support to the vulnerable in our society. First of all, let me explain what we mean by the third sector. It encompasses religions, charities and voluntary groups, covered by Charity Commission rules and guidelines. We also need to say who we consider as being We also need to consider who we mean as being vulnerable in our society. It is those who are in the dawn of life, so the children, those who are in the twilight of life, so the elderly, and those who are in the shadows of life, the disabled, the homeless, the infirm, and those who suffer from addiction. We firmly believe that their needs are best served by organisations which are free from political motivation and aren't as close as families who are maybe unduly influenced by emotional issues. The third sector can take a balanced view that encompasses both the state and the family concerns for dealing with the vulnerable to achieve the best results for those most vulnerable of our citizens. The third sector are not there to make a profit for their shareholders, although of course they do need to balance their books. They need to do this to remain effective organisations and to be able to work effectively within our communities. They are free to direct their spending to where it is needed most and where it will produce the best results for those most vulnerable. Charities are far more likely to know the problem at grassroots level and have people working for them who often have been through issues themselves that reflect those who they're helping. A charitable trust has been pioneering a scheme for several years where offenders who have been in prison for less than 12 months are met by a mentor to help them through that vulnerable time when they can easily reoffend. The Justice Secretary is now saying that he wants more to be met at the prison gates by a mentor. This trust aims to break the cycle of reoffending, of committing crimes and disadvantage, and create a much safer community for all of us. Another point I would like to raise, and was sort of raised by the family side, is the standard of care provided by the third sector and by state facilities. I saw on TV a while ago a documentary on the state care systems and was appalled at how shockingly low the standards were in these care homes for both people suffering physical and mental difficulties and the elderly. People were being abused and ignored when they needed help the most. The fact that they were vulnerable and unable to stand up for themselves make this all the more abhorrent and cruel. People were being pinned to the floor, physically and emotionally abused, and completely and utterly humiliated. Now just ask yourselves, would you be happy living or having a loved one live in conditions like this? Because I know I wouldn't. The reason the third sector provides a better standard of care is because workers acknowledge, understand, and help with problems these vulnerable people may have. My fellow speakers will add arguments to convince you of the importance of the third sector in providing that much needed support to the vulnerable in our society. I therefore urge you to vote for the third sector. Thank you very much.
Can we please now have Kelsey Sellers, who will continue the case for the state?
My Lord Speaker, fellow students and members of the U3A, the state is most responsible for the vulnerable in society because it holds accountability to the people. It cannot pick and choose when or who it does and does not wish to support. As Ben mentioned before, often charities or businesses in the third sector do this due to a lack of funding, lack of resources, few volunteers, and a less insight into broader needs. The state, unlike the family unit and the third sector, has a large force monitoring them. It is us, the people. We regulate what the government is doing through the process of elections. This is evident in the history of this country. Attlee's government in 1945 were voted into power due to their proposals of the National Health Service. This shows us that as a society, we can trust the government to care for those in need. Otherwise, they will face an unwilling electorate and removal from office. It is just not accountability which makes the government most suitable for the care for the most vulnerable in this society. The government is way more efficient. It has the resources and departments that can seek those who need the help mostly. The family and the third sector cannot do this for everyone. With over 89,000 looked after children and 12,000 rough sleepers in the UK, we can see that there are many which have not been supported by their families or helped by organisations in the third sector. It is unfair to place the burden on the families or charities or private businesses in the third sector when providing care for the most vulnerable should be the role of the government. This is why I propose that we put pressure on the government to look after its most vulnerable people. Although I am not completely ruling out the role of the third sector and the family, I am suggesting a collective attitude be adopted that the government should act as a foundation of the care for the most needy in this society. It should provide services and resources for the vulnerable so that there are no groups which are disenfranchised or suffering without a consistent arm of support for them. If we leave social care just to the family or the third sector, it can result in a crisis and possibly more vulnerable people falling through the net. People with long-term needs, such as the elderly, will be neglected. The support they need in their homes and from public institutions will not be reached because charities and the third sector couldn't cope with such a large scale. Without the state, the education of young people in poorer areas will not be provided. Without the state, the health needs of poorer people will be unnoticed. And without the state, social care will revert back to a time in the 30s when many people were stricken with poverty. People were avoiding medical attention because of its costs. The only institution which can effectively provide care for the vulnerable is the state. Thank you very much.
Sammy Board to continue the case for the family.
Lord Speaker, fellow students and members of the University of the Third Age, the relationship between the caregiver and receiver is the most important ingredient in the delivery of care for our elderly and vulnerable, and there is no substitute other than to make this caring relationship revolve around the family. We will impose a non-accountable face-to-state authority over a loving family member at our peril. The family should be at the very heart of any debate. about the provision of care and support. The Beveridge Report, Founding Our Welfare State, was published 70 years ago last Saturday. Even though it was dismissed by the Chancellor of the Exchequer at the time, Sir Kingsley Wood, as, quote, an impractical financial commitment, please take special note of that, it came into being in 1945, and it contained a particularly important guiding principle. I quote, "The welfare state should not stifle incentive, opportunity and responsibility that would discourage an individual from providing more than the minimum for himself and his family." And now look where we are. We find ourselves in a culture where the default position is to look to the state for everything, and the position of the family is threatened again. We shouldn't be able to just go online and order up a personalised state-funded care package. This is not www.thegovernmentwillbailyouout.com. Absolutely not. As the gap between the cradle and the grave expands ever more, did you know that 1 in 4 babies born this week will statistically live till they are 100? We cannot escape the fact that social care costs are going to rise meteorically. Despite our protestations, we will all get not just old, but much older. And why should we look to the state to be financially liable and to come around twice a day and spoon feed us? Why is there this total disconnect we have between the expectations of our social services and what we ourselves are willing to pay for them? This has got to be bridged. We must revise our expectations and take greater financial and personal care for our own families. The state may provide services for collecting my rubbish, paving my roads, stocking my libraries and building my schools. But if the Barnett graph of doom is to be believed, exponentially exploding social care costs will prohibit local authorities' expenditure on one of these basic services as soon as 2030. I don't want the rubbish collecting state enterprise to be responsible for what happens in my family. My parents did not abandon me when I needed them, and I will not abandon them in their hour of need. I want to be the person responsible for caring for my parents. I want to be that person because any fulfilled and thriving society has family at its very heart. Of course, I'm going to need help. Establish resource centres, daycare assistance, and provide some deal-not-inspired tiered funding. Yes, please. Encourage the development of care homes that can be made corporately accountable. And train care workers to be proud, absolutely, but channel this through the family. Don't accelerate the meltdown of an already damaged nuclear unit by imposing a tsunami of further state interference, taking away another responsibility and another part of the glue that holds our families together. Lord Speaker, please don't take me or my family out of this equation. Thank you, Lord Speaker.
Megan Bristow for the third sector again, please.
Lord Speaker, fellow students and members of the U3A, my colleague has addressed the political and financial aspects that make the third sector a favoured option to provide the care that a vulnerable person needs. But I will be addressing the social aspects of the value of the third sector in providing care for the vulnerable in our society. First, the third sector is very largely made up of individuals and groups who have first-hand experience of vulnerability. Charities are often created by family members of those who are currently suffering or who have suffered with or from a disease or a disability. There are also both long-established and new not-for-profit organisations that have seen problems in the community and have responded by action. Some of our oldest charities came into being before any government even realised these vulnerable people existed. Abused children or older people without shelter did not always have families to provide care for them, and those with families were still not provided with the care they needed. Often working in specific areas, such organisations are able to offer emotional support and an understanding of issues that come from experience. Moreover, their years of practical experience mean that they have expertise that is difficult for a governmental body to acquire. Secondly, in these days when vulnerable groups are often subject to prejudice, the third sector, with its direct and often personal experience, is in a powerful position to inform the public and to interpret the realities of the vulnerable people they represent. This is valuable in helping to break down many widely accepted stereotypes, particularly those involving the disabled, the unemployed, the homeless, substance abusers, the elderly, and ex-offenders, all of whom are vulnerable in some way or other. Such stereotypes fuel prejudice and reduce society's readiness to help. The support and empathy that the third sector expresses demonstrates that its representatives are both knowledgeable and approachable. Someone needing their help is much more likely to receive more objective guidance than that available from the family, and such a person would feel more free to talk about fears which he or she may have that might upset their family. In addition, when any face-to-face contact is with a volunteer, the vulnerable person or family member is greeted with enthusiasm and encouragement, and people employed by charities are also much more likely to share the same beliefs and therefore be more committed to the work than someone who's in it just for the money. These are just some of the social aspects of the third sector in providing care for the vulnerable in our society, and because of them, I urge you to vote for the third sector. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed for really excellent speeches. We'll go straight into the floor debate now, and remember that you all have 90 seconds to speak. It's actually quite a long time. I'd now like to call upon Ian Fennell from the Fetcham U3A.
Madam Speaker and fellow attendees at the CARE debate, I would like to stress the importance of the state providing appropriate information to enable individuals to make rational decisions about their health and psychological well-being in later life. Current lifestyles and the environment affect our future. In the UK, the Office for National Statistics data shows that for men aged 60, the expectation of life has increased by 4.5 years over the past 20 years. We should be enjoying the many opportunities offered by increased longevity. I welcome these marvellous improvements, not least because they apply to a group of which I am a member. There are important implications for funding retirement through pensions and state benefits, and for social and medical support for the vulnerable. The health of the older population affects the point at which independent living changes to dependency and vulnerability. We would all wish that healthy life expectancy or disability-free life expectancy rose more rapidly than life expectancy itself. However, this may not be the case. The House of Lords Science and Technology Committee, in its reports on the scientific aspects of ageing, published in 2005 and 6, expressed disappointment at the lack of progress in determining the true situation in the UK concerning health improvements in later life. By contrast, in the USA, disability levels in later life are established to be falling. My wish is that new research will clarify this situation so that we can make individual choices to improve our future prospects.
Now, a student from the Maherefeld High School. Where are students? Yes.
I would like to bring the recently reported case of Tracy Sloan to your attention, the mother of a cerebral palsy sufferer who put off her own cancer treatment for 2 years, after which she went straight back to caring for her sick son. Where is the help for people like this? And where is the support? I ask you, Lord Speaker, which is more necessary? A third runway and 2 disastrous wars, or the adequate care for people we love? As a society, we can choose to reallocate taxation in order to ensure that everybody in every area of the UK has excellent care. This should be our first priority, and we here at Macclesfield High School are strongly of the belief that this is the state's responsibility. Thank you.
Patsy Thornton from the Wokingham U3A.
My Lord Speaker, fellow students, There can be only one valid answer to this question, as has already been argued with great eloquence from the young men from Canterbury. The family is the keystone of our society. The strong family is the foundation of a strong nation. Let us consider for a moment the most vulnerable sector of our society, that is babies and young children. They have no voice. They are completely dependent on care. Last year in the UK, there were 13.3 million dependent children being looked after by their families. Only 89,000 in local authority care. This is less than 1% of the whole. More than 99% of those children were looked after by their families. We've seen already in this debate that no one of the three sectors can stand alone. They all have to work together. The state provides the finance. Charities like Home Start provide vital support for young mums struggling to cope with their families alone. But at the end of the day, it is the family who carries the burden of care for the vulnerable. The family is the vital safety net on which we all depend.
And a student from the Churchill Community College.
Matthew Sample, Churchill Community College. Lord Speaker, fellow students and members of the U3A, caring for the vulnerable in our society has been a cornerstone of the morals of British society for centuries. We have a history of revolutionary laws embodied by the sweeping reforms of the Beveridge Report after World War II that prove that Great Britain has considered an obligation of a decent society to care for the vulnerable. And I think that the time has come for the national government to take control of social care. 10.6 million people in Britain are aged over 65, and 3.1 million people are disabled below that age. Such a large job to take care of these people cannot be tackled by the current mesh of government, families and the third sector, which allows so many to fall through the cracks. There are, of course, a number of obvious issues with this. The size of the job, and of course, the very, very large cost of the job. But our own National Health Service proves that we can tackle such a job effectively. To conclude, however, I think that despite personal opinions, compromise on this issue must be made. In the current financial climate, we simply cannot afford, on a national level, to cover the costs attached to such a task. So for now, the best solution is coordination. Coordination between all those who provide social care, so we can work together as a nation to try and provide the social care that the vulnerable people of our society deserve. Thank you.
Krishna Dutta from the North London U3A.
Lord Speaker and fellow attendees, I want to take you to another important care concern, which does not necessarily deal with our physical need and our emotional need. It cares for our intellectual needs. I'm of course talking about the University of the Third Age. We all know that as human beings, we need good health as well as supportive family system wherever possible. However, given the improved lifespan and diminishing family size in our time, more of us are feeling suddenly lacking in mental stimulation in the company of others, because we as family is small, they have flown the nest. We are social beings, and the deprivation of opportunities for conversation with others is a lack. And this can bring on psychosocial isolation and eventually to the onset of dementia. A very grim prospect indeed after a long life. We at the University of the Third Age have long been seriously supporting the provision of this aspect of mental sustenance for our members who are no longer in full-time paid employment. As a non-profit making charitable learning society and a cooperative, our members have been sharing their skills and experiences with others who seek it. We also encourage them to venture towards new areas of knowledge and interest to broaden their mental landscape.
We have to come to an end. I'm so sorry. Your time is up. Forgive me. A student from Cockermouth School, please.
Longrig, Cockermouth School, Cumbria. At this moment in time, I'd like to propose the opinion of that of what is a collective society. I am, of course, along with quite a few others in this room, of the opinion that no one can stand alone. We must stand together. However, we live in a democratic country, and we have voted for the people who we wish to run our country. And therefore, I personally believe that as a collective nation, we should rely on our government to control, to manage, and to lead our families and our third sector groups in order to provide the best social care for society. As it has probably been easily highlighted, each group has one or many more positive aspects that they can bring to the care of the social society. However, as many of you have probably been thinking along the way, there are a lot of contradictions. And so perhaps the best way to delete, so to speak, the contradictions within the arguments is simply to bring together the best of all three of the worlds. We will never have a clearly flawless system. However, with teamwork and a true humanitarian society, we can certainly create the most optimistic.
Ella Marks from the Ealing U3A.
My Lord Speaker, fellow members of the U3A and students, we have heard very many emotional arguments as to why the family or the voluntary sector should take the greater responsibility for the vulnerable in society. But I would argue that it is only the state that can take the major role in this. It is the state which has the resources necessary. The state has the greatest ability to identify where the most pressing needs are, and they are not shackled by personal biases. The family naturally want what's best for their one member, but we must not forget that there are many who have no family, the homeless, those with grown-up children living abroad, or the elderly widow or widower or single person who never had any children and who have outlived their siblings and friends. Charities naturally want resources for their limited group, be it religious or for those with a particular disability. The state has responsibility for everyone. The state has the resources, and above all, as we've already heard, is accountable to an electorate. Thank you.
Student from Fakenham High College and High School and College.
Hello, my name is Michael Berry and I'm representing Fakenham College and Sixth Form. It's our unanimous verdict that the state is the clear primary source of what should be the source for health and social care. It provides and can provide the most comprehensive safety net for everyone who needs care. I believe that we do have a right to expect care from the state. From 16 up to the age of 65 and beyond, we pay taxes, we vote, and we show our support for the state. It's only fair that they can help support us in our times of need. The state can also help maintain and regulate standards, whether that be a private care home or a state-funded hospital. It can maintain the professionalism and ensure that a private institution can care for those who require it and is not driven by profit. is important. Excuse me, sorry. And also, just from my experience, my nan is also, she has Alzheimer's and has, and what has been mentioned in very passionate arguments about the family, she's cared for by my grandfather. And my grandfather, a caring, patient man, looks after her very well. But of course, he wouldn't be able to do that alone. He's obviously elderly. He might require care in the future. I think it's important that we do bring all important aspects from all three sides of this argument together. But it's our unanimous verdict that we support the state for an overall comprehensive system of care. Thank you.
Maggie Whitbread, Thurrock Q3A. Maggie Whitbread, yes.
Don't start it here. Madam Speaker, students, colleagues of the U3A, with the festive season almost upon us, all children in care will be saying, all I want for Christmas is a mum and dad. Where are they? Due to the state at the bottom of a very slippery mountain of red tape, as my family experienced 38 years ago, for every step we took forward, we took two back. Culture, religion, colour, too institutionalised, etc. Children in care are hungry for encouragement, stability, happiness and the security of being part of a loving family. There are over 85,000 people willing to give these children the love and involvement of family life they so crave. We accept checks must be thorough and potential parents need to be investigated fully to screen out the unsuitable minority. But for every 9 people who apply to foster, adopt, only 1 person is successful. With children being taken into care at a rate of 1 every 22 minutes, this tragic bureaucracy is a total betrayal to family life. When my daughter received her MBE from the Queen last year, the day after she won the BBC Sports Personality Award, the Queen said what an absolute inspiration she was to children in care. And she replied, all we need is love, love. Love of a family is all we need.
A student from Pennycook High School.
Rose Andrew, Pennycook High School. Lord Speaker, in the United Kingdom today, around half of people aged over 75 live on their own. Although many people are still entirely capable at this age, some will require a degree of help with household chores such as cooking, cleaning and washing. These people are not incapable of being independent. They do not need to be moved into an expensive nursing home. They just need a visit from a carer as little as a few times a week. In Scotland, if you're deemed to be in need of this care, it is provided free of charge. However, in England, a person must contribute to the costs, or depending on their situation, even pay for them entirely. Surely it makes financial sense to provide care at home for free, so that our elderly population can be more independent for as long as possible, and therefore less dependent on the state. If and when people do need to move into a care home, they ought to have the support of the government. It is outrageous that in England today, it is not unusual for the elderly to be forced to sell off their homes and assets simply to afford a basic standard of care that they require. The care homes which are not provided by the state are not always reliable. In September 2011, an independent care company, which cared for 10% of the elderly in Britain, announced their closure. All of these people had to be rehomed. Many private companies are purely interested in profit and not the security of the elderly. By putting the care of the elderly into the hands of the private sector, we risk profit becoming more important than the individuals involved.
Doreen Rain, Banbury U3A.
Lord Speaker, I'd like to expand one aspect of the values of the third sector already mentioned by my young colleagues. Due to their closer relationship with their clients and hence availability of first-hand experience of issues involved, third sector organisations are well placed both to educate and, my main point here, and to promulgate preventive action in areas of vulnerability such as health, childhood, ageing and behaviour. Moreover, preventive action in one area can even have effects on the very vulnerable in other areas. To give just one example, I have heard that one ex-offender has formed a charity focusing on changing gang behaviour and attitudes, working closely with convicted gang members and existing and potential gang members. This has the potential to prevent further gang involvement and to benefit gang members themselves. However, I would suggest that such work might also help to protect their potential victims, in particular the frail elderly and other vulnerable groups. Third sector organisations have long been involved in preventive work with vulnerable children, with health issues and with ageing. There is thus considerable preventive action already undertaken in the third sector at many levels, ideally providing valuable links between other levels and other areas of service. Sorry, I only had half a sentence left.
A student from Colne Park High School.
My name is Kate Whittaker and I'm from Colne Park High School in Lancashire. Lord Speaker, I ask not what we can do to ensure care for the vulnerable, but what the state can do. We pay our taxes for the things that matter. Elderly people have been paying into the taxes all their working lives. And research predicts that by 2025, the annual cost of care will be £33,000 per person. How we look after the elderly shows what kind of society we are. Are we a society that puts pressure on families for money they haven't got? Or are we a society with a state that can help? Running the household from 23,000 to 100,000 is a wise move, and raising the threshold is a wise move also. Maybe the government is spending more than necessary on events such as the Olympics. We're spending millions on military tanks to murder. Could this be spent on care for the elderly instead? After all, what goes around comes around, and one day we'll all be in the same boat. The state should do three things: help, help, and help. Thank you.
Margaret Wainwright from St Albans U3A.
Lord Speaker, fellow students, I wish to argue that the state is responsible for the vulnerable in our society, whether young or old. The state has a responsibility for all its students, for all its citizens, and that responsibility should be fair. Not one rule for the rich and one for the poor or vulnerable. The gap between the rich and the poor must be reduced, as the unfairness of it is loaded against our most vulnerable fellow citizens. We need to change our mindset urgently from an acquisitive society to a more responsible one at all levels, personal as well as corporate. And I'm speaking here about taxation. I was encouraged last night to hear on the news that Starbucks management have actually agreed to pay tax that they legally could avoid. They are to be commended. And I hope Google and Amazon will follow suit. These legal tax avoidance measures must be stopped and the tax system made much more fair to reduce the inequalities in our society, ensure that both vulnerable and non-vulnerable in our society are supported. Thank you.
A student from Pembroke School.
Tess Saunders, Pembroke School. Social care and the well-being of those in society is one of the greatest responsibilities in any modern democracy. All too often we are faced with problems regarding social care and the health industry, ranging from concerns over abuse in our care homes to protests over hospital department closures, as we witnessed this morning outside Downing Street. These problems require urgent solutions. Some we may begin addressing today. But who are the vulnerable? In Pembrokeshire, the lowest populated county in Wales, 5,000 children live in poverty. They will most likely grow up in poverty and receive little support in their later years. How can we break the cycle, and who is best to make the change? Thank you.
Robina Hutton from Tweedale U3A.
My Lord Speaker, students and U3As, the state is not a mechanical escalator, a sugar daddy, or an escape hatch. Individuals should take more responsibility than they got used to back in the 20th century. Those that become weak in old age may have done heroic things, climbing Ben Nevis or cycling from Caithness to Cornwall. Becoming what they call vulnerable can happen to any of us. Families have the appropriate knowledge to support that person, who is as able as anybody else to say what his needs are and not just to be done to by officials. They have worried at the disintegration of the family for a century, but reintegration in new forms has been happening. Changing work patterns and longer lifespans have strengthened intergenerational links. We see all around us mobs of grandparents pushing buggies, taking the grandchildren on trips and indoors reading them stories, teaching skills, styles, manners. And children teach these oldies smartphone and computer skills. Young adults remember more than ever before these times spent together forming bonds between generations. Of course, young people have always helped the vulnerable, always have done. But with a new scheme where people bank their hours in a time bank as a form of credit to use in their own prospective old age, we are moving towards taking responsibility for ourselves in our old age.
Well, now this is the point when we get really free. So I'm going to ask anyone, a student or someone who hasn't yet spoken, a student or a member from the U3A who would like to make a statement for 90 seconds. Who? Yes, gentleman there.
Peter Cox, North London, U3A. My Lord Speaker, I want to assert a fundamental...
Sorry, you are actually going to speak a bit later, are you not? Your name is down. Could I ask someone who hasn't spoken? Yes, lady here. Thank you.
Madam Speaker, students and fellow colleagues, U3A. My name's Jean Stogden, Barnet U3A, and I'm speaking from three perspectives. One, personal, that I've done a lot of caring in my life, certainly 5 years for my husband as a carer, and grandparent duties as well. Third sector, I founded Grandparents Plus, which I'm thrilled that a young person actually mentioned. I founded it with Lord Young, Michael Young, who founded U3A. And thirdly, because I'm a professional social worker, still working myself, we'll all be vulnerable at some time in our lives, and I'm vulnerable now. And I just wanted to say who I really want to care for me and provide support are my own family, because they love me. That's the first thing. Secondly, third sector, because of all the things colleagues here have said. And thirdly, of course, it must be backed up by the state, particularly, of course, our wonderful NHS service.
In a minute, okay. Mary Randall from Croydon U3A.
Lord Speaker, fellow students and members of the U3A, I'm a member of a voluntary organisation which can see that wherever possible we get the best results when we are doing things for ourselves. People seem to be happiest when they are working together on a project however small. This philosophy can be applied to all the groups we are thinking about: vulnerable children, the disabled, the very old. The voluntary sector, while it cannot provide everything, has a huge role to play in making life bearable, easier, and hopefully enjoyable. The state, and sadly increasingly too often nowadays, the family, doesn't have the time to spend with the most vulnerable members of our society. People who need care don't want to be a statistic or to be seen as a job. They mostly need someone to listen to them, to spend time with them, to share their activities with them, and not to be in a hurry. The voluntary sector's most valuable asset is time, given freely. Thank you.
There was a student here who had his hand up. Was it you? Yes.
Oliver Lamarchon, Pennycook High School. In our society today, Lord Speaker, there are various pressing and complex issues which only the state is equipped to deal with. May I draw our attention to the issue of the elderly during the winter months. In particular, as one ages, the winter becomes darker, more threatening and colder. It is in the brute face of this certainty and fear in which gas and electricity prices are rising exponentially. Many of the elderly go cold or hungry as a result of this. Indeed, 14% of Britain's elderly population, i.e. 1.5 million elderly people, resorted to living in just one room of their house in order just to contain heat. Whilst in 2009, official statistics revealed that 9 elderly people died every hour from cold-related illnesses. These facts merit an interviewee of a news organisation branding it like living in the old ages, the dark ages, sorry. Only the state is equipped to deal with such issues. The state has the power to collaborate with such energy and electricity companies and can take steps such as raising and altering the cold weather payments. To turn our back on these responsibilities and to leave it to families and to the charities is to turn our back on a moral obligation to which we have bound ourselves as a proud nation of social healthcare. Thank you.
Reginald Adodoaji from Westminster City School.
My Lord Speaker, fellow students and members of the U3A, I believe that the state is most responsible and most suitable for the delivery of social care to society's most vulnerable people. As my colleague Ben quite rightly pointed out, the state has far more resources than both the family and the third sector, with the government last year having announced a tax revenue of over £100 billion. Now, while the state's funds have been compromised by the economic recession we are currently in the midst of, this also affects the family and the third sector. With family breakup now sadly so common that half of all marriages end in divorce, this means broken homes are more and more likely to appear. While the family can provide emotional care and the third sector has many resources at its disposal, it is only the state who can provide free education and free healthcare, the key to equality of opportunity, which will prevent youngsters from becoming vulnerable at a young age. While the third sector and the family are only accountable to individuals, such as family members and local residents, the state is accountable to everyone. Everyone can be looked after by the state. It is in these respects that I believe the state is head and shoulders above the family and the third sector, and why I believe they are the best actor in ensuring social care for society's vulnerable. Thank you.
How about a U3A member? Lady there, yes.
Anne Zebedee, Wokingham U3A. Madam Chairman, fellow students. Yes, the state is the person that has to organise it. They have the ability to raise the taxes and to spend the taxes fairly, but we have to keep our eye on what happens. We just can't obligate our responsibility just because we've given them money and just because we have put them into power. We have to be careful who we put into power, and once having put them, we keep our eye on them on what they're doing. Volunteers have a good responsibility within this structure to keep an eye on and go and see people in homes and in our own home, visit and coordinate things. The private sector, the third sector, also has an important role in this. They can provide day centres and other activities, like the U3A can provide activities. But overall, we all have a responsibility and we all have to keep our eye on the ball.
Stefan Brown from St Anselm's.
Lord Speaker, fellow students and members of the University of Third Age, we believe that the family is the most important element of care, mainly because the family has no ulterior motive. Quite simply, the family is best for care. They do it for no gain. Essentially, the family is altruistic. It is often the case that grandparents will care for grandchildren when the parents are away. There are several important side effects to this situation. The elderly feel that they are useful, and they continue to have a crucial function and role within the family. The minds of the elderly continue to be stimulated, which is essential for good health. And of course, this means that parents can get out to work. Also, with the family, there is continuity, whereas with the state and the third sector, this continuity can disappear. With the state, it can disappear through a change in the government. Indeed, previous governments have ideologically encouraged families to take care of their members. Research has shown that families offer support in a complex interaction of rights, duties, and obligations. Further research suggests that altruistic ideals and qualities of empathy decrease among professional care workers. They face increasingly heavy workloads and have to deal with strenuous demands. These factors increase the likelihood of emotional suppression, detachment from patients, burnout, and other negative consequences. The family support network ensures that altruistic ideals and empathy remain secure. The home is where the heart is. Lord Speaker, I tell you this, there really is no place like home. The family comes first.
There was a U3A member here who wanted to speak. Yes? How about a gentleman there? Yeah.
Stanley Miller, Keyworth U3A. Lord Speaker, to misquote the Bard, some have greatness, but some have vulnerability thrust upon them. Some are born vulnerable, some achieve vulnerability. What I'm really trying to say is that we are all vulnerable at different times and in different ways. And so I think we ought to resist the temptation for calling other people vulnerable, because we are all in the same boat. The loss of a family member, a serious illness, redundancy, financial difficulty, all of these place us in a situation where we look to support from our families, from charitable organisations within our communities, and indeed from the state. Without all these practical assistance, we are in considerable trouble. But we mustn't confuse provision with responsibility. The matter for our debate is who is responsible for the care of the vulnerable in our society, and that responsibility must surely lie with the state, who provide the framework, the moral, the legal, the ethical framework in our communities.
Isabel Minogue-Corpse from Banbury Academy.
Ladies and gentlemen, today I want to talk to you about a charity that is very close with our school, Banbury Academy. The charity is called BIP, which stands for Banbury's Homeless Young People, who obviously provide care for the homeless who are young. However, they also support the older generations who also have no home. The main purpose is to provide food, drinks, and a safe place to enjoy their lives even in the darkest of times. The homeless can be provided with a warm room with television, computers, art resources and musical instruments, so their lives can immediately become more productive. But these people have been rejected from their families and loved ones, and the state fails to provide appropriately to their needs. The state may provide the basic needs, but do not help the homeless youth when it comes to rehabilitation. The state help the symptoms, but do not provide a cure. Thank you.
About a student from this block here. Yes.
Anthony Davis, I'm from St Anselm's School. From personal experience, family are the only key to any form of care. I believe that you can walk 10, 20,000 miles and have no one behind you. But knowing that you have a blood bond with your family, it creates that much stronger need for any form of care in the entire world. Personally, as Jocelyn mentioned, and so did Stefan, home is at the heart. Wherever you lay your hat, you can create a family around it. The state will not be there specifically if you're that far away. Family will always be behind you. Thank you.
Anne Hayes, Belfast, U3A.
My Lord Speaker and fellow attendees, since the implementation of the welfare state in 1945, the state has had wide experience in administering, organising and providing care in its hospitals, homes, residential units and in the community for people of all ages. It must continue to have prime responsibility for care and should issue frameworks indicating these responsibilities, as has just happened in Northern Ireland with its framework for older people now out for consultation. However, due to medical advances and improved healthcare, those with disabilities are living longer and older people are surviving to a greater age, all of which places a heavier burden on the state. But the state could work in conjunction with families and religious and voluntary organisations, and we have already heard presentations on the roles and the value of all of these. Because in the past, these agencies have provided and could continue to provide care and protection for the vulnerable, including children in care, as well as disabled people. Families, as already we have heard, are so vitally important, providing their love and support, but they in turn must be fully supported within the home environment with home adaptations, training and support for carers, and provision of regular respite care. Partnerships underpinned by contractual arrangements could be created with religious and voluntary organisations. These already have homes and units funded by donations, administered and staffed by specialised professionals, committed volunteers. Values must be kept, but the state must continue to take prime responsibility in partnership with families and religious and voluntary organisations. Thank you.
How about a student from the far block over there? Yes.
I'm Ali Ismail, representing the State Westminster City School. I'm going to explain to you why the state is the only suitable one to take charge of social care for the masses. First of all, family works as independent groups, where the majority will not be able to provide social care for themselves. It is biased to the masses. There was on the 31st of August 2012, there was a third sector company, I think it was a charitable company, that attempted to help people within Leicester. These were homeless people that had many issues, from alcoholism to drug addiction. And essentially the problem was that they didn't have the resources. They didn't have enough people working for them either. It took them 2 years to get it running, and many times the project was nearly closed down. Now, when I found out that our school would be representing the state, I thought it was rather ironic, as our motto for our school for many years has been Unitate Fortior. This is Latin, meaning there is strength in unity. I believe that the state represents that firmly. The state takes into account the third sector, which supports them with the revenues, and the family who vote for the MPs and the Prime Ministers who uphold their values, and they put pressure on these people to ensure that the social care that they require is met. And so, this ensures that the state can act as, This ensures that the state can act as the body that can ensure all the needs of the social care are met by working together with these separate groups. Thank you.
Peter Cox, U3A North London.
Thank you, my Lord Speaker. You've all been wondering what fundamental I was about to assert. Well, it is this. We are Homo sapiens sapiens, the wise human. We are in this chamber anyway. Now, research shows that the optimum size of any group of humans is about 150, several extended families in a small tribe, from hunter-gatherer times down to the present day. Everybody helped each other. But now, in our gigantic societies, we were no longer homo, we are homunculus, tiny cogs in the massive state wheel. We exist in monolithic states of many million, a totally unnatural construct. We have become reliant on the state, we have lost ourselves. Everything has become someone else's problem. We need to rediscover that natural group size and feeling and become Homo sapiens again, supporting each other. Too much support from the state or an outside agency, and we lose our innate humanity. So the role of the state and other agencies should be to equip the family to take on its natural, humane role. So be wise humans, ladies and gentlemen, and vote for the family as the fundamental core provider.
I'm going to take a student from the far block there, yes.
Sam Gugi, Colne Park High School. Lord Speaker, I believe that the state should be responsible for the care of vulnerable citizens. The reason for this is the state insists that all citizens of the United Kingdom pay taxes each and every year. Somebody earning £25,000 would find out that £1,900 of their money would go on funding welfare. This is then used to pay for treatment and care within the National Health Service. The NHS was formed on July 5th, 1948, this making the NHS 64 years old. This meaning that the elderly were the forefront of the NHS, and our elderly have paid their dues and are entitled to all of the benefits and care provided by the NHS for free. Furthermore, in 1942, there was a unique cross-party consensus agreeing to the finding of the Beveridge Report. If we could agree such measures at a time of war, with bombs dropping on all of our towns and cities, how can we now say we cannot afford this? A large proportion of taxpayers have rarely, if ever, used the NHS for treatment or care. Therefore, it seems unfair to suddenly abandon them just because now there may not be enough tax to pay for their care. In last year's comprehensive spending review, the government transferred an extra £2 billion into the social care for 2015. £1 billion of this coming from the NHS. Now, this has been called a stick and plaster solution. Even if it was to be allocated on a permanent basis, £2 billion is not nearly adequate to meet the needs of the social care system. To conclude, I believe the state should be responsible for caring for the vulnerable, and I should delegate more of the budget to social care and the NHS. Thank you.
John Lloyd, Wearside U3A.
Lord Speaker, in my third age, I have seen the growth in the third sector that is unbelievable. Can you think of a society without Childline? 30 years ago, would anyone have considered that a television programme called Children in Need could raise so much money? I think the problem that this House has is that expectations and economics do not go together. I think all this audience has been privileged by you, my Lord, to give us the opportunity to have an intergenerational debate. And if the debate ends when we walk from this chamber, I think your efforts will be a failure. I hope that all of the students who are here will talk to students in other schools about this debate, and every member of U3A goes back and talks to their U3As of the potential of being involved in the big care debate. We all have responsibility. The state may have to take the lead, but the third sector in the long term is the only growth industry. Families are smaller. The state want to step back from their responsibilities. We have to take it up. Thank you.
Thank you, John. We're running a bit short on time, so what I'm going to do is to take the last three named student speakers on the list. So let's go on the list. Let's go with Mustafa Al-Sadi from Westminster City School, please. Mustafa Sadi? Not here? Is it you?
Can you have them first? Akram sir.
You.
Lord Speaker, as mentioned earlier by my colleagues, the state has sufficient resources to aid the vulnerable. It is also held responsible for caring for the vulnerable, hence the sense should drive the state to increase the reliability of their services. The state is not an impersonal tax-gathering machine. The state, unlike the family, is able to cultivate love into a tangible reality with professional skills. Do not forget that the state offers support for the third sector and the family because the state acknowledges the valuable impact on society due to their broad on society. However, the state must take responsibility due to their broad insight and careful management. And as my colleague Ali said, the state represents unity.
Abisola Owale Aletu from St Anselm's.
Lord Speaker, fellow students and members of the University of the Third Age, we believe that the family is the most important element of care because in the present economic climate of savage cuts being made to all budgets, long-term funding will soon prove inadequate. Despite rising demand for assistance linked to the ageing population, most of the 152 local authorities in England have reduced the most amount of money they spend on elderly care. The charity Age UK has warned that the cuts were forcing growing numbers of needy elderly people to live frightened, isolated lives, as the services they usually relied on gradually eroded. If the state cannot protect our grandparents, then who can? Furthermore, as care becomes increasingly expensive, the families who do care for the elderly are financially worse off. The new Grandparents Plus research shows that almost half the carers who were previously working gave up their job to look after a vulnerable grandchild. 41% are now dependent on welfare benefits. 3 out of 4 family and friend carers experience financial hardship. 8 out of 10 people agree that the family and friend carers should receive financial support. Family carers must be properly supported. They deserve recognition for the vital role they play, respect for service providers including access to information and advice, and should be rewarded by improved access to benefits and a new national allowance if they care for a child for more than 28 days. This is why we believe that the family comes first.
Akib Mahmood from Banbury Academy.
Lord Speaker, fellow students, members of the Q3A, the point that I would like to raise is how religious groups work alongside the third sector to help provide care for the vulnerable in our society. To start with, I would like to mention some quotes from the Bible, which says, "Whoever closes his ear to the cry of the poor will himself call out and not be answered." From the Torah, which says, "Happy is he who performs a good deed, as he may tip the scales for himself and the rest of the world." From the glorious Quran, which says, "Show kindness to the parents, and to the kindred, and to the orphans, and to the needy, and to the neighbour who is a kin, and to the neighbour who is a stranger, and the wayfarer, and those who your right hand possesses." These selective few quotes, even though don't mention anything about the vulnerable, they imply that it is a duty for all religious groups to look after and care for them. Therefore, because it is inscribed in such compelling books, it means religious groups are volunteering in religious organisations voluntarily. And as you already know, everyone in the third sector wants to be there. And that's why we believe the care will be of a better quality. Lastly, I would like to mention that there are only certain problems and situations that only a religious group can help with. For example, if a Muslim woman had a problem with a debt, she would more likely want to seek advice from a fellow Islamic sister who knew about the Holy Scriptures and can guide and give advice through them. Thank you.
So thank you all very much, and apologies to those who didn't manage to get in. As always, time is short. So we're moving excitingly towards a vote, but before doing that, we are now going to have our summary speeches, a maximum of 3 minutes each. And let me call upon Martin McBride from Carterton U3A to sum up on the case for the third sector.
My Lord Speaker, fellow students and members of the U3A, the students of Westminster and Canterbury have made some persuasive arguments to support their relative cases. But none, I have to say, as strong as those you have heard, my fellow students of Banbury Academy. Let us take a moment to listen for the cries for help from the most vulnerable in our society. No, we cannot hear them from here. The state is too remote to respond. And many of the most vulnerable do not have a family, or their families have abandoned them. However, as we have heard from my colleagues today, the third sector, the charities and the religious organisations, are close enough to hear and respond to those cries for help. And they do it not just because it is a job, but because, like ourselves, we feel passionately in what we are doing, and they know they can make a difference to where it counts. My Lord Speaker, we need to treat the vulnerable people in our society, those in the dawn of life, those in the shadows, and those in the twilight, with dignity and respect. This need was strongly identified in the recent Care Quality Commission's report for the state of health care and adult social care in England 2011-2012. The speakers for the state have made strong evidence about the finances. And yes, the state is responsible for finances. This debate is about who's responsible, not just the finances. In fact, the speaker mentioned about the fuel allowance. Perhaps the Lords should denote part of their fuel allowance to keep the House of Lords warm in the winter. The family have argued that they should be the main one. But in our present society, there are so many broken families, so many families that are scattered around. It is difficult to say that the family should always be responsible. In conclusion, I would ask my ageing, note ageing, not aged, colleagues in U3A, who would they rather care for them in the twilight? An efficient but uncaring organisation who leaves a glass of water outside the reach, or the third sector of passionate and caring individuals. Please cast your vote for the third sector. You know it is the right thing to do.
Ursula Steiger, Canterbury U3A, to sum up the case for the family.
My Lord Speaker, students and fellow members of the U3A, you have heard the convincing opening statements on behalf of the family. You will have also considered the thought-provoking supporting remarks. And you will have listened with interest and possibly empathy to those who have challenged the idea of the family coming first. You may even be asking yourself, what family? To be sure, the family unit of the 21st century is very different to that of previous centuries. It is quite likely to be much more complex. It is likely to consist of more layers or more components. It is also likely to reach across different cultures and to cope with greater geographical distances. But those problems can be a family's very strengths. Young people today have a much greater understanding of the many cultural differences in our world. We also hear a great deal about problems within families or problem families. We hear much less about families who function well and who support each other and other members within the community. Of course, we would not dream of suggesting that families, any families, could step confidently into a caring role tomorrow. They need to have preparation. There needs to be some planning. In many European countries, and certainly in my own native country of Switzerland, accommodation is planned for older members of family at the very onset. And mum and dad, grandma and granddad move into a smaller place while the younger generation takes over. But the smaller place is very often just next door. Of course, caring for vulnerable in our society needs skills, a variety of skills, expertise and knowledge. And families need these and need to be given the chance to acquire these if they are to care properly. And families should be supported. They should never be left in need of support. And those they care for should never feel that they're a burden or that they have been dumped on their family. We are quite clear that there are no instant cost-neutral solutions for the care of the vulnerable in our society, nor is there a one-size-fits-all option. But with the family at its core, we feel that surely it can be equipped and adequately maintained to look after their vulnerable members. Families is what are needed, and we are making a case for the family. In the words of an older brother to his younger sibling, you know it makes sense.
Glenys Cheersley from Harrow U3A to sum up for the state.
My Lord Speaker, students, fellow members of U3A, as we have heard, the vulnerable of society are a constant in life. Children, the disabled, and the elderly are always with us, and we are obliged, indeed we desire, for them to be provided for in a compassionate, adequate, and fair manner. This week, as we celebrate the 70th anniversary of the Beveridge Report, the origin of our welfare state, we feel that the state is still best able to provide this support for the following reasons. Firstly, for continuity. Whichever party is in government, the responsibility to provide for the vulnerable remains, and in a democracy, as Kelsey has remarked, the people will insist and ensure that pressure is brought upon the government to provide for those who are in need of it. Secondly, for security of finance. As Ben has stated, only the government has assured income from taxes with which to provide supporting services, such as the NHS, benefits and pensions. And even in times of austerity, such as now, the government must still see these services maintained in spite of financial cuts. Thirdly, for equality. Only the state is able to provide countrywide, fairly according to need. It is reliable, non-discriminatory and compassionate, not variable, not a postcode lottery, nor selective in its provision. As a civilized society, we should demand and expect our government to attend to the needs of those unable to help themselves. It is in the state's interest to assist disadvantaged children and the disabled to become helpful and contributing members of society. We allow that for particular sectors of society, other providers have a very useful role. The family home is often best for children, but it was only in 1889
with the Children's Charter that the state was entitled to cross the threshold of families where cases of cruelty were notified. And not until the Children's Act of 1948 that councils were permitted to assume parental responsibility in cases of abuse. The state must legislate before charity can help. Charities do wonderfully focused work for specific disabilities. For example, the Macmillan Nurses, the Multiple Sclerosis Society. Nevertheless, there needs to be an overarching national responsible organisation to prevent the needy from falling through the net. And this role, we believe, can only be achieved by the state. Thank you.
This has been really an extremely good debate, and I thank you all. Not only have you expressed yourselves extremely eloquently, all of you on all sides, but you've also kept to the rules. You didn't chatter amongst yourselves, no one heckled, and as far as I can tell, no one went to sleep. So, I mean, well done you. Now, we move to a vote. There will be obviously 3 votes, and you can only vote once. And you raise your hands to do so. So I'm going to read out, you know, the option that you've got, and then the doorkeepers will come and will count the number of people who've raised their hands for any particular option. So option number 1, the state should primarily be responsible for providing support to the vulnerable in our society. Hands up.
Right, okay. It's happening, isn't it?
What?
It's happening.
It's happening.
Yeah,
It's
yes,
happening.
it doesn't look like it's happening, but it's happening.
Oh, it's happening. They're voting from the gallery as well.
Okay.
How can you tell?
Okay, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
All right, remember you can only vote once. Next option, the family should primarily be responsible for providing support to the vulnerable in our society. Hands up.
Yes, thank you.
The third option, the third sector should primarily be responsible for providing support to the vulnerable in our society. I think you can kind of guess the results. Never mind, we will still...
The lowest vote is first.
21. So I'm going to use the words that I normally use when there is a division or a vote in the House of Lords when it's filled with members. And I say, my lords, there have voted, and then I go on to the contents and discontents. In this case, we haven't got contents and discontents, we've got all contents, but in different proportions. So the third vote, which was for the third sector, had 21 votes. The second vote, which was for the family taking primary responsibility, had 41 votes. And the first vote, which was the state should take primary responsibility, is 138 votes. So, my lords, My Lords, I declare that the state has it. So, the majority of you here feel that the state should be primarily responsible for providing support to the vulnerable in our society, and you've made your views abundantly clear. You all did a very wonderful job. I think it is fair to say and right to say that there were several of you during the course of the debate who made the very valid point that it is, of course, all three. And I think some of you also made the point that the state provides a legislative framework within which both the third sector and the family work. So I don't think that our conclusion is that we are in any way dismissing any of the options we'd had, that they should work together. And I'm particularly struck by what I think John Lloyd said, was that the debate should not end here in this House, but should continue, particularly the intergenerational debate, which I think has been, I mean, it is a first in this House, and it's been really wonderful to participate in it. So I thank all of you. I do have quite a lot of thank yous, if you'll bear with me, after this exciting afternoon. This event wouldn't have happened without a great deal of work by very, very many people, many of whom have been listening to your debate. Much is owed, obviously, to the English-speaking Union for actually... And the core team of mentors who worked with the students and with you, University of Third Age members, and devised the debate model. We have also to warmly thank the head of our own outreach department within the House of Lords, Sinead Whiteley, who's here in the box behind us. And who I might tell you actually briefs me and writes my briefs for me. So thank you very much indeed. We also would like to thank Yeoman Usher Ted Lloyd-Dukes, who was here a minute ago but is no longer here. However, he supervised all the security for this event and made sure that you got here. The principal doorkeeper, Mr. Phipps, who is here, and his Ted Lloyd-Dukes is here, and his team who came in. This is a non-sitting day, which is why you're all here. Otherwise, you'd be competing for space with the Archbishop and you know. So you've had a flavour of what it's like to sit on the red benches, and I kind of hope that it's going to make you feel quite interested in the work that the House of Lords does and the role it plays in the legislative process, because a lot of people are fairly unaware of it. They think that we just sort of sit on the red benches and don't do much else. It's actually a very hard-working chamber that does a lot of scrutiny and revision of laws, the draft bills that come up from the Commons. We owe our gratitude also to other members of the House of Lords staff who worked so hard to make today a success. But above all, the success is you. I mean, because, you know, you learnt your lines, you went in for your mentoring, you came here, you got here, you stayed awake, you expressed yourselves extremely eloquently, and I really do thank all of you very, very much indeed, and hope that we can have another event like this in the not too distant future. So my thanks. I'm going to go now. I will leave by the door that I normally leave, and you will also then go out, I think that way, maybe this way, they'll tell you, to collect your coats. I hope you have a good and safe journey home, and that you all have a really, really good holiday season. Thank you so much.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, if I could just have your attention, please. We want to get you out of the chamber through the same doors that you came in, but by groups. At the moment, we're very close to another group of people arriving for an event in the Royal Gallery. So when you leave by your groups, in the Robin Room, when you leave by your groups, when you go through the Royal Gallery, could you stay to the right-hand side of it, please, so you don't get mingled up with the other people arriving. The first group of people we would like to leave, please, are the teachers and our friends up in the gallery. Jimmy is on the end. If you just go through the door, Jimmy will guide you downstairs. No, we just want to get the teachers down first so they can collect the students. 2 seconds. Okay. We'll do this by reverse order. The last people in can be the first group out. So the purple lanyards, please, if you'd like to leave through the left-hand doors, you approach them going down the right-hand side of the Royal Gallery, please, to your coats.
Gives us a win. Enjoy that.
You're welcome. So nice to see you.
I'm sorry I didn't hear that. I went up and doing some other order. I'm afraid I didn't hear it. I was like, what? The layout, that's the government program. The Liberal Democrats.
There's not many purple lanyards going out of here now.
No. We've got colourblind on, is it?
Mr. Beach, did you want to